In Conversation with Terry Shepard, award-winning broadcaster, narrator, and author. A deep dive into the writer's craft with the artists and support systems who create the stories we love.
Today, we're stepping into the dangerous, disorienting shadows of 1970s Vietnam, where truth is a weapon, deception is currency, and one woman's choices could save lives or end her own. Nancy Cole Silverman returns with A Spy in Saigon, the fourth installment in her gripping Kat Lawson Mystery series. This time, Kat's assignment is supposed to be simple. Fly to Vietnam, write a travel feature for Journey International, and quietly deliver cash and passports for a covert operation. But when everything goes sideways, Kat finds herself in the crosshairs of an enemy who knows far more than she does. Nancy Cole Silverman, it's great to be with you again. Congratulations on the book.
Oh, Terry, thank you. And it's great to be here. I always enjoy our conversations so much. Thank you.
We grew up with the Vietnam era. Did that influence A Spy in Saigon for you?
Oh, definitely. And I didn't know it was going to, but it was just a story that I had in my background since I was a teenager, because we were all in high school and college, and some of us were drafted out of some of my friends, guy friends, were drafted out of high school because their GPA had goofed around too much, or even in their freshman or sophomore year, they couldn't keep up their GPA and they went to Vietnam. And that always affected me. And then my first husband was in the Air Force during Vietnam. And so I began to know a lot more about that. And I thought I'd safely put that aside. What is this, 40 years later? But wow, came back.
Without giving away any spoilers, take us deeper into the plot of A Spy in Saigon.
I can tell you a little bit. Kat Lawson has a background. She was a journalist, and she's a young and upcoming female, had been working for a newspaper, and she lost her job working at a newspaper because it's working those late hours and working on stories. She and her editor got involved, and that became a problem. And so they dismissed her and promoted him. And of course, back in the 70s, it did happen a lot. And so she is looking around for a job, and this traces back to the second and third books, of course, Passport to Spy and Murder on the Med, where she is picked up by the FBI, who says, we need couriers. We need a courier who is a journalist who would write travel features. We have a travel publication. It's a cover operation for us. So this is all on the QT. And this was actually done, by the way, back during the Cold War, where the FBI and the CIA would use people who had reasons to be in different places of the world to deliver messages. They were not agents. They were not anything but contract couriers that would be logically in a different part of the world, that might be an airline stewardess that would get off the airplane and go to a bar and have a drink and pass a dollar bill with a note on it, or deliver a message and then come back. It was, you knew nothing more than where you were to go and to who you would meet and what you would just pass off. And this is what Kat is going to Vietnam for. She is going to write a legitimate feature. She's been given a $10,000 payment to do that. She's given $5,000 up front, and she's always tight on money because journalists don't make much money and they have time when they're looking for stories and things like that. So she goes to Vietnam, and Vietnam is opening up its borders right now. It's been after the war. There's been more businesses opening up and so forth. But part of what goes on in the under black market world is trafficking of young people. And there is a man she's supposed to meet and give a passport and cash to who wants out of that business. And so she goes, and some terrible things happen very quickly. And so suddenly she is left with these passports and this money and something else that she picked up along the way, and people are after her, and thus the story opens up full bore.
How did you research something like this?
It's interesting because during Vietnam, I was an Air Force wife, and my ex-husband was away a lot. And when you're an Air Force wife back in the 70s, as a matter of fact, I'm going to give a little history here because it does play out in the book, and my research was fascinating with this. The Air Force wives, if your husband was not on base, and the last time we were at Nellis Air Force Base, and if your husband was not on base and he was overseas, you had to move off base. So if you moved off base with your children or just by yourself, you would maybe found a rental near the base so you could still go to the doctors, you could still go to the commissary, but you couldn't live on base. And your support group, when you're in military and you're 3 years in one place and a year and 2 years somewhere else, is that military group who becomes friends with one another very quickly, particularly the wives groups. And when these men would go overseas, the wives would form what we called the Waiting Wives Club, which was because we couldn't necessarily be involved with the wives club on the base because your husband was gone. You might be, but the waiting wives were more supportive of one another. We would have babysitting co-ops. We would have birthday celebrations. A man couldn't get back for the birth of a child, so we would all Lamaze coach her there and help deliver the baby and be there. And because her husband couldn't come back from Vietnam for a delivery, they would try. But it was a very cohesive group and very supportive of one another. What happens sometimes, unfortunately, is you would have a wife and you'd show up at a meeting and that wife had graduated to a very club you never wanted to graduate to, which was called the Missing Wife, the Missing in Action, Wives of Those Missing in Action. And you've all seen the black flags and so forth. And during the Johnson administration, we were not allowed to talk about, and this is not political at all, neither, but it was just, that was the way it was. You were not allowed as a wife to talk about this. I had a girlfriend whose husband was shot down and we were not allowed. I remember being at a football game and thinking, I said to Gail, I said, Brian used to play for this team. We should be able to say something. There should be a billboard saying he's missing in action. And we were doing a letter writing campaign that we were trying to get letters to the Chinese to identify at least what had happened to him and did they know him? And they never answered. And there's a long story about that too. So I really had tucked those stories away many years ago. My friend's husband actually did come home. He was shot down over Hanoi and he did come home. She got a call from the Department of Defense the day before they had flown them out. And they said, get yourself to the base because he's coming home. And she did not know that. It brings chills down you to think he was gone over a year and a half and she never knew. We never had identity until he came home and she was waiting on the tarmac when these guys came off those planes. And you remember seeing, as Terry, you same generation you remember seeing when those guys came off, the wives just running open-handed with little kids and embracing these men. And some of them were gone, like John McCain, for 7-8 years. My senior year in college, I did my video study was all on the MIA wives. One, Dorothy Day, who was Colonel Day was John McCain's roommate at the Hotel Hilton in Hanoi. And I went and I videotaped the F-4s taking off and the background story about what happens to these guys and how well they're trained and how these families survive without them. Because in those days, you couldn't live on the base. You had to live in your own little group. If something happened to you, to your husband, and you were visiting him and you had been in Taiwan on R&R with him, you had to go home to get information to know what happened. They would not tell you. And you could not really protest. And I thought this was interesting to me because there were so many protests going on and so many people that were basically enlisted or drafted to avoid the draft. And you didn't necessarily agree with that war, but you didn't dare protest. And particularly as a wife, you didn't protest because you knew that your husband's assignment could be influenced by that. So you had to be very careful about what your views were. And you weren't necessarily treated well when you went to a new city or a new place. If you wanted to get a job, a lot of times they didn't want to associate with military people. And we still have that today. And I thought this is a story that really needs to be told. So that was the seed of the background of this, is to bring that up into this issue where she's in Vietnam. A lot of her memories come back that she thought she'd buried.
Nancy Cole Silverman is our guest. We're talking about A Spy in Saigon, which is her latest in the Kat Lawson series. NancyColeSilverman.com is her website. She has that unique name that actually gets the .com, which is a big deal for those of us in the business. How has Kat evolved over the course of the series?
When the first book, The Navigator's Daughter, it's interesting because I thought all these stories are coming to me and it's really a lot of my background. My father was a navigator bombardier and The Navigator's Daughter was about an older man who had been in World War II, whose plane had been shot down and he had evaded being captured after jumping out over Hungary and being rescued by some patriots that partisans who wanted to reunite him with his unit back in Italy so he could continue bombing to protect them. And this is exactly my dad's story. And so my father had asked me toward the end of his life to go to Hungary and find the people that had rescued him. And so I thought, as I was going through after my dad passed, and I was going back through his papers and getting everything in order, I had found these letters in his diary and his flight log. And so that was the beginning. And of course, Kat at that time I'm out of a job. I'm in a bad marriage. It's not doing anything and I don't have money. And her father says, go and find these people. And so she has just enough money to put it together, and she's going to be staying with these people who are going to show her around and help her. And she does, and she uncovers a whole new mystery. And that begins the whole series. So she is a rejected reporter, out of work, divorced, life is on the edge. She's single and but she can write. And so she goes and she meets these people who rescue her and rescued her father. And as she comes home, then she's picked up by the FBI because of something that happens, which she uncovers in that book, that the FBI says, now we know who you are and we'd like to use you. And so that leads to Passport to Spy and then Murder on the Med. And finally, she's growing through this and she's becoming aware that everything isn't necessarily as it is. And she's not as naive, and she becomes a little tougher. And then she finally has to face a lot of her own insecurities and backgrounds and things she thought she's covered up and grows. So she's like Kat, because I think she's bold enough that she could stop in her tracks and go, oh boy, that was a mistake, and learn from that.
Human trafficking and the exploitation of children are heavy themes and tough reading. Why did you feel it was important to weave them into the narrative of A Spy in Saigon?
Because it's happening, and it has happened. Russia was very much involved in Vietnam with Chinese, and a lot of children were taken from Vietnam to Russia to be educated, particularly a lot of children that were children of American GIs, because they were not Vietnamese, and there was a distinction about that. And they became children of the dust, and a lot of children that had lost parents and so forth. And as the government of the Soviet Union fell apart and people were looking for anything to make money, there were children and they were vulnerable, and there were drugs and there was cash and there was jewels, and they could all be black marketed. And children were the easiest of all because they needed to be fed and they would follow. And so this was something that was very much a problem. And so I did a lot of research into that and just let my imagination weave the story as that went on. But this has been an existing problem.
Is it easier to write book 4 than it was to write book 1?
It would have been easier to write book 4, except I had naively accepted the president of Sisters in Crime in Southern California. And I really like writers. I think writers are interesting people, and they're desperate to get their ideas on paper. And so often, particularly beginning writers, have no idea how that's going to happen. And having come from a newsroom where I wrote news copy and commercial copy and promotional copy, I thought I can maybe lend a hand to that. And so I thought I would do that, and that would be fun. I was crazy. I didn't realize how much work that would be. A Spy in Saigon was very introspective, and I was a little afraid to write it, to be honest, because I thought, aside from the fact I was so busy trying to organize this organization and do that, I kept thinking, do I have a right to write this? I knew these things that had gone on, and yet, certainly, number one is that as an Air Force wife, there are things you do not do. There are questions you do not ask. I was an Air Force wife during the 70s, and I remembered asking a commander's wife about something, and she says, "Now, Nancy, that's a very naughty question." I asked a lot of naughty questions, I guess. I just wasn't supposed to do that. And there was things you were not supposed to know. I think a lot of that has changed today, by the way, which is really good. But there were a lot of things you were not allowed to know. When we lived in Germany for 3 years, and when we lived there, my husband would go away on assignments, and we were never known to where to go. But I would look and think, okay, pack your parka, because maybe it's cold outside, or maybe. And you didn't need to know. And also, one of the things that happened in the 70s is that Air Force wise or military wise, period, unless you had a piece of paper giving you a power of attorney, you couldn't do anything. You couldn't have you didn't have a credit card. You didn't have access to your husband's checking account. Unless you had the power of attorney to access that account, you had to have your husband or your father signed for you and everything. So buying a home, if a woman her husband was shot down, everything was in limbo. Boom. You had to just find it out. That's why these lives were important to each other and supportive of each other. And it really wasn't until Nixon came into office that we were allowed to speak out and then actually send letters that went to the Paris Peace Accords and went to the head of the Chinese. And when those letters came regarding our friend, they said to us specifically, I said, why should we tell you and give you any comfort when you give us no comfort? Hard words. Wherever your feelings are, that war, that's war. It was very difficult. And to be young and naive and so protected in this country that we grew up thinking it was Friday night football and the malt shop and dragging Central Avenue in your Jeep or whatever it was. And this type of life where you're very protected and very naive about the world going on, which we are in this country frequently, and we're protected and have been. But the awareness is necessary always because freedom comes at a price. And we don't always make the right choices, but we do make choices. And this book was about those choices and the choices ultimately she has to make if she wants to go on.
You're just coming off of the presidency of your Sisters in Crime chapter. What has been the value of your relationship with fellow writers as you've developed as a storyteller?
Oh, watching them grow and be more confident in their voice on the page and finding their voice on the page and realizing that doesn't always happen with the first story, and having the gall to write from the gut. That's hard. And it's still something I struggle with today because it is personal, even though the situation, the scenario may be very different. You can't capture your reader. You can't hoodwink your reader. You can't tell you got to show. And when you show, you bleed on the page. You have to. And helping writers find their voice do that is really my mission, I think. It's fun. I enjoy it. I enjoy encouraging other writers. And it doesn't matter if you get a big publisher. Most of us at a later point in life aren't going to find a big publisher. It's really hard to do. So you'll find a mid-list publisher and they will go with you. Maybe your work's going to be accepted there, maybe not. But having the guts to put it on the page and let your story be told and find the voice to do it is important. And I think it adds confidence to the person's life who's doing it.
What keeps you writing?
Fear. I mean, really, I have a contract. I think if I don't get that contract, I've got to finish the contract. But I fall in love with each book I'm working on. And that's always the favorite book at the time. Although I have to say, A Spy in Saigon, I really gut-wrenched over that one. But I'm working on a new one right now, which will be the fifth book in this series. And I won't finish it. Or somebody said to me about A Spy in Saigon, I can't wait to read it. And I remembered thinking I was about 3/4 of the way through and I was struggling with whether I was going to take the turn I did take or not. And I said, so am I, because I don't know where it's going, but it's fun and it's something you can always do. And I think it's also something that as writers get older, we get better because we're more attuned to, I know what I felt when I was 20 and you asked me how has Kat grown, and we took Kat from where she was young to middle age, and she will just forever stay middle age. I'm just going to leave her middle age. Who is it? There's another writer out there who does that. That's just great. They'll just stay in that age. That's good. But it was important to me to be able to show that and to show her growth, her awareness of who she was when she was naive and protected and didn't really feel it was her place to step out. And now she has no problems with stepping out and doing what she has to do.
What do you hope people will take away from their encounter with A Spy in Saigon?
That there's a price for freedom, and there's a price for what we decide to do as a country and to be involved and to take ownership of who we are as citizens of this country and what we want to project and the responsibility we have to our fellow man. and not just in this country, but in the world, because this democracy has been a 250-year-old experiment that was never, ever done, where groups of people from different backgrounds would come together, different face, shapes, sizes, colors, and adopt as our guiding light a constituted and inalienable rights among each other. And that has led the world into a new way of looking at how we can exist, and we owe that to each other to keep that light going.
You've given us a tantalizing hint that there is a 5th book coming out in the Kat Lawson series. What can you share about that?
I'm too new into it right now. I've got some outlines on that and so forth. In the series so far, Murder on the Med was a little lighter, and we took a little deviation from that, certainly from Passport to Spy and definitely from Navigator's Daughter. So in some ways, I think sometimes I need to just take a little bit of a breath and say, okay, let's not hit quite so hard on that. I really can't go there right now. I'm deep into it, and I'm taking a break for Thanksgiving this week, and I'll get back to it next week, and I'll tell you as we go. I've got it outlined. It's a very fluid outline right now.
The whole idea is still gestating in that creative brain.
Oh, it is, yeah.
What question haven't I asked you that you wished I had?
Oh, none. I appreciate it. I think it's good to feel uncomfortable as a writer and not to have access to the questions first, because as a reporter, you shouldn't reveal what you're going to ask somebody, because you have a more instantaneous reaction, and I think that's very good.
The book is A Spy in Saigon. It's the 4th in the gripping Kat Lawson Mystery series, written by our special guest, Nancy Cole Silverman, and that's the website, nancycolesilverman.com. Nancy, this has been great. Thanks for the conversation.
Oh, Terry, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
In Conversation with Terry Shepard is a copyrighted presentation. All rights reserved. I'm Lisa Davis. Join Terry Shepard next time in Conversation.